Hello there, this is MemphisWeather.net meteorologist Eric Procius bringing you via video this year our 2014-2015 Winter Outlook for the Memphis metro area. Typically we put this in blog fashion, and this year we decided to do it as a video blog so that you can go back and watch it anytime you'd like. Even go back and check this on YouTube after the winter is over and see just how well we did. Making no promises whatsoever, but it's always interesting to look at. It's a topic that a lot of people are interested in knowing a little bit more about. So we're going to use the opportunity to educate you a little bit and also tell you what we think might happen this year as far as winter is concerned. So I'm going to start off with some caveats, however. First of all, I am a meteorologist, not a climatologist. They are two different things. I know a little bit about climate, and I have studied quite a bit, and so I understand some of the trends and so forth, and so I'm willing to do what I can to put this winter outlook together for you, but understand that I spend an inordinate amount of time in the next 2 to 36 hours versus the next 3 months. And that is because of the emphasis that we put on here at MemphisWeather.net on the short-term forecast, on making sure that we're providing you the latest and most accurate information as possible in that short term, the nowcasting and so forth that we do on social media. All of that is to make sure that you know what's going on in the very near future and are prepared for that. This is just kind of a fun little exercise as well. Hopefully one that I can do fairly well at. But again, I'm a meteorologist, not a climatologist. And if I did get paid for accurate winter outlooks, I would be hungry and my kids and wife would not be happy. So take that for what it's worth, and we'll move on through here. We're going to start off with what most mid-southerners think happen in the winter. We have this little boundary through the area called I-40, and it's really not a boundary, it's a landmark. It is a nicely positioned landmark that basically splits the metro north and south, and so it's very easy to use when we're talking about weather patterns, whether they're going to be to the north or to the south. And we kind of use I-40 as that marker. However, it really does not do what most people think it does and separate the snow from the rain. The I-40 corridor is not a boundary that actually determines where rain and snow falls. Some of you in North Mississippi will agree with me that there are times when certainly you get pretty decent snowfall down there in North Mississippi, and the folks in Tipton County are wondering where's mine. It is typically obviously colder to the north, and so a lot of times the snow does fall more to the north than south. But we're going to dispel that myth right off the front. Now, what actually happens in an average winter looks something like this. This is the average snowfall across the United States for the winter season, and you'll see that there is a pretty good, nice dividing line that does run somewhere right through the Mid-South. We'll take I-40 as your average if you want. But there is kind of a dividing line between the areas to the north that get quite a bit of snow and the areas to the south that really don't see very much. And if we zoom in on the Mid-South, you'll see that areas across North Mississippi, for instance, down just to the south of Memphis, average around 3 inches a year of snow. That may surprise some folks who think that it doesn't average out that high, but actually it does. But if you look just to the north of the metro, even up around Tipton County and points to the north, that average is closer to 6 inches. And so there's a pretty good variation right across our small geographic area as far as how much snow usually falls. Now, right here in Memphis, with the official observations taken at Memphis International, the average snowfall for Memphis International Airport is 3.8 inches. It is higher than that to the north, and it is lower than that to the south. Now, there's multiple different types of patterns that affect how our winter season plays out. The one that most people are familiar with is the El Niño, which actually El Niño is just half of the El Niño Southern Oscillation, or ENSO, pattern. ENSO is related to variations in sea surface temperatures and rainfall patterns in the tropical Pacific. El Niño happens to be the warm version of that, where the temperatures in the ocean and the eastern Pacific off of the coast of western South America and the Central American area are warmer than average. La Niña is just the opposite. It's where we have cooler than normal temperatures in the eastern Pacific. Now, there's a pattern called La Nada, N-A-D-A, which literally means nothing, and that is the middle ground between those two. So when temperatures are close to normal in that particular area of the Pacific, then we call that La Nada. This El Niño pattern is fairly predictable a few months out. And that is because it is a fairly gently changing pattern. It is not something that changes overnight or even within a couple of weeks. It takes time to build up and to die out or move to the other side of the oscillation. So it can be predicted a little bit up to a few months out. It does have specific influence over North American weather, especially noticeable in the cool season. And so you're probably wondering, well, how in the heck do temperatures in the Pacific have any influence at all on what goes on here in the United States? And I'll just give you a brief explanation in that those sea surface temperatures, the warmth or coolness of those, have a direct impact on the rainfall patterns over those areas. And the warmer air that's over those warmer sea surface temperatures holds more moisture and tends to promote more rainfall. Well, when you have more rainfall and more cloud cover, you create temperature variances in the atmosphere as well. And so you're going to end up with cooler air that's under these rainier patterns and warmer where it's sunnier. That directly influences the jet stream. And so the jet stream is kind of a dividing line between cooler air that's bottled up to the north of that jet stream and warmer air to the south. So when you talk about sea surface temperatures and the correlations or connections, teleconnections that has to other factors in the atmosphere, there is actually a pretty direct influence between those. So when you get the jet stream shifting, the jet stream flows west to east generally from the Pacific over North America, and so if it changes over the Pacific, it's also going to change downstream over North America. When the jet stream changes, you get changes in the noticeable weather or the tactile weather, the precipitation and the temperatures that we feel over North America because of those influences. So there is some correlation there, and it is somewhat predictable. Now, as far as the effects that we generally see when we're in an El Niño pattern, for instance, that jet stream that we talked about, generally during an El Niño pattern flows basically right across the southern United States. And where the jet stream is, that's where the storms track. And so you end up with a wetter pattern and a cooler pattern underneath that jet stream because of the storms that move through there. The rainfall will fall in those areas, and because you have more clouds and rainfall, the temperatures are somewhat suppressed. Warmer air then is generally found farther to the north. Now this is versus average. It doesn't mean that it's cooler in the southern United States than it is in the north, but generally it's cooler than average in the south and warmer than average up to the north. And there also tends to be a fairly pronounced dry region around the Ohio Valley extending down close to the mid-south during these El Niño patterns. The polar jet stream, which has got the really cold air behind it up to the north side of it, tends to be flowing right across Canada and then into the North Atlantic. So those are the average positions during a normal El Niño winter. The middle ground, the La Nada winter, it looks a little bit more like what you would consider maybe a normal type of pattern, where you have this warmer air down across the south. It does tend to be wetter because the subtropical jet stream is blowing up out of the Pacific across the southern United States, so you get that wet pattern. The polar jet stream, though, tends to take a little bit of a dip. It comes across the northern United States and then off the east coast, so areas north of that, across the northern tier of the U.S. into the northeast, that is where the cold air resides in these La Nada patterns. So why I'm showing these two is because this year we're actually right in between what you may call a weak El Niño and kind of a La Nada pattern. We've been expecting an El Niño to show up this winter time, and actually the predictions are now backing off that slightly, and the El Niño just has not materialized quite to the degree that was expected at this point. And so if we do go into El Niño this winter, it will likely be a weak El Niño and not a moderate to strong one. And that means there's going to be other factors that are going to have an influence on our weather besides just the El Niño pattern itself. So let's look at one of those in particular, and that is the North Atlantic Oscillation. And I want to bring this up because this has had more influence probably on our weather the last couple of years than an El Niño pattern has. We've been in La Nada for the last 2 winters. So the North Atlantic Oscillation actually has had more influence on our weather, and that is the change in the jet stream over the North Atlantic and where that jet stream tends to set up, where it's typically over the North Atlantic, but changes in that position and strength dictate the NAO. It is much less predictable, more than a couple of weeks out. So while El Nino patterns can be predicted with some reliability out a few months, the North Atlantic Oscillation, the predictability of that extends out maybe 7 to 10 days, and that's about it. So we can't be necessarily looking at what the NAO is going to look like for an entire winter and try and predict what that's going to mean, but it does give us a pretty good handle on maybe that mid to long range, the 7 to say 14 day outlook. We can look at this type of oscillation to gather trends. So a positive NAO results when you have above normal pressure and temperatures in the eastern United States. The negative NAO, which is kind of what affected us periodically last year, usually results in below normal temperatures and stormier pattern in the eastern U.S. And so the negative NAO is actually kind of what we've been keeping an eye on last year, and it is something also to watch for this year as well. This is what the jet stream and temperature and precipitation patterns look like when you're in NAO negative and NAO positive. So in the NAO negative mode, this is the United States right over here, so the Mid-South is right in this area. The eastern U.S. sees this big dip in the jet stream because of this blocking pattern that's out over the Atlantic. You have a big high pressure ridge over the Atlantic. You also tend to have one over the western United States, and so you get this dip in the jet stream, and on the north side of that dip you end up with cold and snowier weather. The eastern U.S. and the northeast in particular tend to have very cold, snowy winters or periods during those winters when the NAO is negative. And then you have the big ridge or kind of the hill in the jet stream here over the Atlantic, and then it dips again over Europe, and they end up with a cold and dry pattern over the North Atlantic European region as well. Now in an NAO positive, the jet stream tends to be a little bit more west to east, a little bit more zonal we call it, with less hills and valleys in it. It contributes to a warmer season along the eastern seaboard and into the central eastern United States. Cooler weather is bottled up here to the north around the Hudson Bay and up towards Greenland. So these big dips in the jet stream are what typically are the result of or result in our colder weather that we see in this area as well as off to the east. Now here's a look at the last 6 winters, and what I want to use this for is just to point out that the ENSO pattern, or the El Nino La Nina pattern, does not generally have a direct connection to what we experience here in the in this portion of the United States, in the Mid-South. For instance, if you'll look at the last couple of winters, we were in a La Nada pattern both of those winters. In 2012 and 13, our temperatures for the December, January, February period averaged about 3 degrees, a little more than 3 degrees above normal. Last year, as you know, it was cold, and we averaged for December, January, February below average, or about 3.4 degrees below normal, both in a La Nada pattern. You see the precipitation varied by about 4 inches from a below average to an above average period. However, both of those did have well below average snowfall. Now, some of you are going to see that and think back to last winter and say, you're out of your mind, Eric. We had ice storms, we had power outages, and if you're saying all of that, you're probably in far northern Shelby County or Tipton County. Those of you in North Mississippi are thinking we didn't really have that much of really a snowy or icy pattern. And that is actually true. When you are dealing with this portion of the country, the timing of temperatures and precipitation is very crucial, and it's very, very difficult to forecast with any accuracy out more than a couple of days, and sometimes even within those couple of days. We had a couple of times last year where the temperatures in central Shelby County held at 33 degrees while it rained for multiple hours. Tipton County in those times was basically under an ice storm condition. So you have more that goes into this other than just the general pattern or trend that we're talking about here. La Nina, you see we have both above and below temperatures, below normal temperatures with those 2 years. An El Nino winter here was cooler than normal, which is kind of what we'd expect. Actually, it was even colder in 2009-10 than it was last year. You'll see the snowfall those 2 years from El Nino to La Nina were both well above average. In fact, we ended up with 19 inches of snow at Memphis International Airport between those 2 winters. In the last 3 years, Memphis International has gotten a total of 2.5 inches of snow. So it varies quite widely. The average, again, is 3.8, and the average temperature for the winter at Memphis International is 43.4. So here's one of the things I took a look at putting together this year's winter outlook, and that was the NOAA Winter Outlook that came out in the last month. This is from the National Weather Service, and this is a probability map. This is not telling you what the temperatures are going to be. It's telling you what are the chances of above and below normal temperatures. And as we've seen over the last several months, in fact, the last couple of years, a major drought has been taking place over here in California. It's been warm. It's been, in fact, hot. And they're expecting that those warmer conditions will most likely continue. The chances of above normal temperatures are better than 50% out in those areas. The portions across the southern United States, from the southern plains across the Gulf Coast and even extending up into the Mid-South, are predicted to have a better than average chance of cooler than normal temperatures. So what that means is that our chances are better than a normal winter or an average winter, that it will be colder than usual. Again, that doesn't relate directly to what the temperature is going to be. It just tells you that basically our chances are better than 33% that we're going to have a cooler than normal winter. As far as precipitation is concerned, this map looks very similar to what an El Niño map would look like, where you have a jet stream flowing across the southern United States, and so you end up with wetter than normal conditions across the southern plains and into the southeast. Dry conditions up here along the Great Lakes down into the Ohio Valley, where a lot of times that El Niño dryness does set up. Dry in the Pac Northwest, and right here in the Mid-South you see it says equal chances, which means there's basically no trends one way or the other that indicate that we will be above or below normal precipitation wise. So that would be basically about average precipitation wise for the Mid-South. One other source that I like to look at is run by a couple of climatologists who actually do some energy forecasts as well, and they put out these winter outlooks as well. They're actually fairly well respected, have a good track record. They do tend to hype just a little bit, I guess, as far as the information they provide, but there is some pretty good science behind what they do. That's WeatherBell Analytics, and their winter outlook that came out a couple of weeks ago. Actually, they have a winter outlook that came out even earlier in the year, but kind of their official outlook has come out here in the last couple of weeks. And this is their temperature forecast for this year. Now, this is actually in degrees Fahrenheit, departure from normal. So this is not a probability forecast. This is what they expect as far as departure from normal temperatures. And you see a good portion of the eastern U.S., basically everything east of the Rockies, with the exception of the far northeast and southeast, is predicted to have below normal temperatures for this year. Again, out west, they agree with NOAA that those warm temperatures are going to continue over the southwestern U.S. Now, as far as how far departure from normal, we're sitting basically right on the edge of this blue line. The blue area is -4 to -6 degrees below normal Fahrenheit. So if you take the edge of that being -4 degrees, then you end up with an average temperature very similar to what we had last year. We were 3.4 below normal last year. 4 to below normal, somewhere right around there, is going to mean that we're going to have another cold winter if this forecast pays off. And then you have their snowfall forecast, and this is again for December, January, February. Actually, this is for the winter season, which continues into early March for many areas. But you see a good part of the United States, they're predicting above normal snowfall for this year. And in fact, in the Mid-South area, this is a 167% of average, which means well above average snowfall. Recall that our average snowfall in the Memphis area is around 4 inches, so 167% of normal would be around 6 inches. So that doesn't 167% is not necessarily 20-inch snowfall, but it does mean that we could see above average, about 2/3 above average. So that would again play out to about 6 inches or so. So when we put together our outlook for the upcoming winter, several factors came into play. One of those that we looked at is analog years. And analogs are basically seasons in the past that had conditions similar to what we're forecasting this year. predicting a weak El Nino this year. And so basically I looked at 10 analog years over the last 50 or 60 years or so that had weak El Ninos, and looked at what we got here in Memphis in those 10 years. Also compared that to research that was done by the Weather Service here in Memphis recently on the impacts of an El Nino on the Mid-South. And their research showed that temperatures tend to be cooler than average, that there is very little correlation between precipitation and the El Nino pattern. So El Nino doesn't necessarily dictate the correlation to precipitation, but we do tend to see a little bit cooler than average winters during El Nino. The effects that they found were most noticeable, though, when you had moderate to strong El Ninos. So when we had weak El Ninos, there was actually less correlation to temperature and precipitation than there were when you got into moderate years. Again, we're expecting a very borderline weak El Nino this year. Compared that with that research that I did with the NOAA Weather Outlook, the discussion that went with that, the information that WeatherBell is consistently putting out that we subscribe to, that provides pretty good science behind what they're doing, and some use of analogs again, and another weather outlook that was put out by Weather Trends 360 that has a lot of data and some pretty good science behind that as well. You'll notice that we were not influenced by the Farmer's Almanac. That is not a forecast that I even look at. We use those that are based on science and that will tell us how they're getting their information. Farmer's Almanac is one of those that is not in that category. It is fun to read, but we don't put any. We didn't use that at all putting this together. So, what does our winter outlook look like? Well, first of all, we'll start with what I have a little higher confidence in, and that is the temperatures. I do think that we, at the end of February, we're going to look back and see that this winter was below average temperature-wise, slightly below to moderately below, and it could be as cold as last year. Again, 3.4 degrees below normal last year. I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility that we could end up that cold again this year. Things are just kind of setting up that way. The long-range patterns and the teleconnections are indicating that we could see that type of pattern continuing this year. So we'll see how that plays out. But I think if you hated last winter because it was so cold, I would say go buy your gloves, make sure that you've got the electric blanket on, and be ready for that, because I think we could see, again, this is periods of cold weather averaging out to a below normal for the year. It certainly doesn't mean that every day throughout the winter is going to be well below normal. Precipitation, really don't have any trends that indicate whether we're going to be above or below average. Nothing pointing to a definite above average, nothing pointing to a definite below average. So I'm going near average on this. It's kind of a middle of the road forecast, but we'll see how that happens. But right now, nothing to indicate otherwise. Snowfall lovers, I hope that this is the year for you. I do think that snowfall could be at least near average, which would be around 4 inches in the direct Memphis area. Could be above average, especially with the indications coming out of WeatherBell there, and because temperatures might be colder than average. Hopefully that some of that turns into snow for those of you who love snow. For those of you who don't, we'll cross our fingers and hope that it's just cold and not snowy. But the trends are going kind of in that direction, and the fact that we've had 3 winters now with very little snow, I think the law of averages says that we're probably due for a near average snowfall at least. So again, take that for what it's worth. But there's my forecast for this year. Slightly below to below average temperatures, precipitation near average, and snowfall near to slightly above average. Again, we'll see how this plays out. I could be wrong about the entire thing, and it would be okay with me if I were wrong about it. I'd gladly take the hate mail. We'll see what happens. But again, I'm not a climatologist, but hopefully this information has been helpful to you to provide at least some background on where the information comes from and how we arrive at it. So, we're going to keep you updated throughout the wintertime. MemphisWeather.net on the website, on our blog, mobile website, all of that will have the latest information. We will continually keep you updated on Facebook, Twitter, and Google+, with blog postings, with nowcasting throughout events. As these winter storms move into the area, and we're always right on that borderline of whether or not it's going to be just cold enough, or whether the precipitation is going to move out before the cold air moves in. It always seems to be that type of pattern. Occasionally we'll be sitting in cold air when a storm system moves through, but as those events draw nearer, we will certainly provide the information. As a NOAA Weather Ready Nation ambassador now, we are basically going to make sure that education, as it has been in the past, has been one of the keys in the in how we provide the information to you. We want to make sure that you're prepared, that you're educated, and that you're informed on the weather regimes that affect the Mid-South. And as the events are ongoing, we will be nowcasting, providing you with current conditions, what you can expect, how you can be prepared, and so forth. So look us up on Facebook and Twitter, MemphisWeather1 on Twitter, MemphisWeather.net on Facebook and Google+. Check us out on the blog. Subscribe to that so you get it in your email, or we'll always tweet those out or put those on Facebook as well. We hope that you will download our apps from the App Store and Play Store for iPhone, iPad, Android devices. We have links to all our social media accounts in there. You'll be able to get your winter storm warnings pushed to you through Stormwatch Plus with the latest information on storm totals that we're expecting, what types of weather to expect, current conditions, radar that's got really, really good precipitation typing in it, so you'll be able to know where it's snowing, where it's raining, and check out and see if it's right along I-40. You can always email us at eric@MemphisWeather.net. I'll be happy to take those, answer your questions. I hope you've enjoyed this presentation. I hope it's provided you some information, and have those tomatoes ready at the end of the season. I'll be happy to stand up and take those if this just blows out of the water, I guess. So thank you very much for tuning in, and I hope that everyone has a great winter. Stay warm.